A man stands in a crowded, sun-baked slave market, holding a leather pouch of silver and a heavy sack of barley. The heat is stifling, tasked with producing the first complete printed translation of the Bible into English. He was a pioneer working by candlelight. You assess what you are given. You weigh it against what you provide. When the relationship becomes a liability, when the cost of staying outweighs the benefit of the connection, you cut your losses. Orpah is the silent hero of the modern world. She set a boundary. She protected her peace. She looked at a situation that offered her no upward mobility, no security, and no joy. And she made the absolute correct logical choice. The modern relationship is not a covenant. It is a consumer contract. And as long as you are producing, as long as you are behaving, as long as you are keeping your end of the bargain, you are safe. But beneath that safety, you are exhausted. You carry the quiet, crushing anxiety that if you ever stop performing, if you ever slip, if you ever become a burden, you will be left behind. Because you know the rules of the contract, you know what happens to broken things in a consumer culture. They are discarded. You carry this exact same dread into your theology. You assume God operates on the exact same terms. You assume your spiritual life is a balance sheet, a ledger where your obedience is weighed against your failures. And when the failures pile up, when you break the vow, when you fall back into the exact same pattern, and as he translated the texts of the Old Testament, he kept crashing into a specific Hebrew word. It appeared nearly 250 times in the scrolls. Of sin you swore you were done with. You assume the divine math has finally shifted against you. You assume the ancient covenant is broken and your name has been crossed out. You wait for the door to close. You wait for the abandonment. But Hesed operates on an entirely different economy. It refuses to let the failure of the object dictate the loyalty of the subject. To understand the absolute shock of this divine economy, you have to realize that God does not merely tolerate our failure from a polite distance. To see what Hesed actually costs when the betrayal is absolute, we have to leave the dusty road to Bethlehem. We have to return to the stifling heat of the slave auction, where a prophet is holding a bag of silver and staring at a woman who sold herself away. Silver hits the iron scale. The sound cuts through the noise of the crowd. Dust swirls around his sandals. The midday sun burns the back of his neck. The heavy air smells of unwashed bodies, panic, and dried sweat. Hosea counts out exactly 15 shekels. He heaves a homer and a half of barley onto the dirt floor. The merchant nods. The transaction is complete. Gomer steps down from the wooden block. She is stripped of her dignity. She is ruined by her own choices. She chased her lovers until the lovers stopped paying. When he tried to translate it as mercy, the English word felt too cold, too transactional, too confined to a courtroom, until the fine clothes wore thin, until the food completely ran out. And now her husband stands in the filth of the market. He is paying retail price for a woman who already belongs to him. He does not scream. He does not demand a groveling apology. He does not hand her a list of impossible conditions. He looks at her and speaks. You are to live with me many days. You must not be a prostitute. You must not have intercourse with any man. And I will live with you. He takes her hand. They walk out of the market together. This is not a romantic rescue. It is a brutal, humiliating, public execution of Hesed. Hosea is not just acting out a personal tragedy. He is a living, breathing metaphor for a God who refuses to break the blood oath. Israel chased foreign gods. Israel built altars on the high places. Israel forgot the God who pulled them out of Egypt. The covenant was utterly broken. The contract was entirely void. The law of the ancient world demanded blood. The logic of the human heart demanded abandonment. But Hesed stepped onto the auction block. God is telling a shattered nation that their rebellion is not stronger than his promise. The ancient kings would have sent an army to slaughter the rebels. The human kings would have burned the city to the ground and walked away without looking back. God sends a prophet with a bag of grain, When he tried to translate it as love, the word felt too thin, too easily tied to fleeting human emotion and fickle desire. He tells Hosea to go and love a woman who is loved by another. He tells him to act out the exact tearing agony of the divine heart. God feels the betrayal. God feels the spiritual adultery. But the covenant was not built on Israel's perfect performance. It was built on God's perfect character. He will buy them back. He will pay the price. He will drag them out of the slavery they actively chose. But a prophet with a bag of silver is only a shadow. To understand the terrifying, final length that Hesed will go, to honor a shattered contract, you cannot just look at a market in Israel. You have to look at a wooden beam, heavy with the weight of the Roman Empire, being dragged up a hill outside Jerusalem, splintered wood presses against a torn, bleeding back. Iron spikes are driven through human wrists. Blood drips down and begins to pool on the dry limestone of Golgotha. When modern Christians look at the cross, they typically see a transaction of moral debt. They see a savior stepping in to pay a spiritual fine to a cosmic judge. But to a first-century Hebrew mind, steeped in the history of the Torah, what is happening on that hill is far more ancient and far more terrifying. Jesus is not just offering a moral substitute. He is resolving a legal impossibility. Remember the bloody path between the severed animals. He needed a word that held the muscle of a legal obligation but the warmth of a bleeding heart. English did not have that word. Remember the absolute law of the Keret Beret, the cut covenant of the ancient Near East. The vow was explicit. If I break the terms of this relationship, let what happened to these animals happen to me. Israel broke the terms. Humanity shattered the covenant. By all the laws of ancient justice, the violator must be cut to pieces. The relationship must be voided, and the innocent party is legally free to walk away. That is the moment God is supposed to leave. But centuries earlier, when God cut the original covenant with Abraham in the desert, something entirely abnormal occurred in the text of Genesis 15. God told Abraham to cut the animals in half and lay them on the rocks. But when the sun went down, Abraham fell into a deep, heavy sleep. Abraham did not walk between the pieces. God walked through the blood alone. God made a unilateral promise. By passing through the severed animals while the human partner slept, the creator of the universe took both sides of the contract. He swore to uphold his end of the bargain, and he swore to take the catastrophic, violent penalty if humanity ever broke theirs. The crucifixion is not a tragic accident of Roman politics. It is the payment of a millennia-old blood oath. This is the absolute, cosmic climax of Hesed. It is the moment the covenant maker looks at the covenant breaker, acknowledges that every legal and logical reason for abandonment has been perfectly met, and chooses to be torn apart in their place rather than let them go. The tearing of his flesh is the Coverdale invented one. He took two distinct English words, smashed them together, and printed them on the heavy, textured paper of his 1,535 Bible, tearing of the animals. The blood on the limestone is the blood in the dirt. He is not canceling the contract. He is absorbing it. He is enacting the fierce, unyielding loyalty of a God who refuses to let the failure of the object dictate the love of the subject. This is the theological architecture of the universe. This is the staggering reality of a God who buys his own bride back from the slave market with his own blood. But the ultimate question is, what this ancient, unbreakable loyalty actually means for you when you wake up tomorrow morning, carrying the weight of your own broken promises. A man sleeps while a fire passes through the blood and a unilateral promise is forged in the dark. A prince defies a spear to protect his rival, and a friendship survives the fury of a king. A foreign widow clings to an empty-handed mother, and a ruined lineage is reborn. A prophet counts out 15 shekels in a slave market, and a wandering wife is carried home. A nation chases every idol in the desert, and a creator refuses to erase their name. A translator works by candlelight to capture an ancient loyalty, and a new English word is born. A savior bleeds on splintered wood to absorb a shattered contract, and the ultimate oath is paid in full. Loving kindness. The word caught on. It survived centuries of revisions, eventually finding its way into the King James Version. Same covenant, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the dust of that market in Hosea chapter 3. A man paying retail price for a woman who already belongs to him. He does not wait for her to clean herself up. He does not demand a groveling apology to rebuild his ego. He simply steps into the filth, listens to the silver hit the iron scale, and takes her hand because he promised he would. If you are in a season where you feel like you have finally broken the contract one too many times, where you have slipped back into the exact same failure, where you feel like a spiritual burden, where you are just waiting for the divine math to shift and the door to finally close, you are operating on the fragile terms of a consumer culture. You are waiting for the return on investment to drop. But God does not love you with a fleeting emotional sentiment. He loves you with Hesed. He is not looking at your failures and asking, "Do I still feel it?" He is pointing to the blood on the limestone, and from there, into the vocabulary of modern Christianity. But there is a fatal flaw in Coverdale's invention. It sounds soft, and saying, "I promised it." The failure of the object does not dictate the loyalty of the subject. And may the God who walked through the severed pieces alone meet you in the middle of your broken promises and hold you, with a loyalty that refuses to let you go. If this opens something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted from trying to earn their place in the kingdom. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. When modern readers see the word loving kindness, they imagine a grandfather handing out candy. They picture a gentle, harmless affection that smiles at everything and demands nothing. It sounds like a sentiment you write on the inside of a greeting card, smelling of cheap perfume and stamped with a pastel flower. He steps up to the auction block. He is here to buy back his wife, Gomer, who left his house and lost everything she had. Coverdale was not trying to invent a romantic sentiment. He was trying to build a bridge across an impossible linguistic gap. The problem is that loving kindness describes an internal emotional state, a feeling of goodwill toward another person. But the ancient writers were not talking about feelings. In the brutal, sun-scorched landscape of the ancient Near East, survival did not depend on how someone felt about you. It depended on what they were legally and practically bound to do for you. When the famine hit, when the invading army crossed the border, when the drought cracked the soil and the money ran out, love is an emotion. This word was a binding mechanism. To understand what Coverdale was staring at on the page, you have to strip away the centuries of soft English theology. You have to step back out of the 16th century printing room and walk into a world where relationships were not based on handshakes and good vibes. They were based on blood. Two men stand in a dry valley. They drag a heifer, a goat, and a ram across the rocks. They draw a heavy blade. They cut the animal straight down the spine. They pry the ribs apart and lay the bleeding halves on the sand. Hosea counts out 15 shekels of silver, listens to the heavy clink against the merchant's scale, hands over the barley, and takes her home. Blood pools in the dust. Flies swarm. The hot air smells of iron and torn flesh. The men take off their sandals. They walk barefoot through the blood between the severed pieces. They speak a single, terrifying vow. If I fail to keep my end of this bargain, let what happened to these animals happen to me. This is how you make a treaty in the ancient Near East. You do not sign a paper. You do not shake hands. You cut a covenant. The Hebrew phrase is karet beret. It literally means to cut a covenant. It is visceral. It is binding. It is a matter of absolute survival. In a world without police forces, without international courts, without emergency relief funds, your life depends entirely on the alliances you cut. A great king conquers a smaller city. The king demands tribute. The city demands a shield. Taxes are paid. Armies are merged. It is a business arrangement built on violence and sworn in the dirt. If the famine hits, Your covenant partner feeds your children. If the raiders come, your covenant partner draws his sword. If you die, your covenant partner takes in your widow. The terms are absolute. The penalty is death. We see this scene in Israel. A young widow on a road to Bethlehem, and two friends swearing a blood oath in a field. The covenant is not a statement of emotional affection. It is a legal mechanism of survival. But what happens when one side breaks the terms? What happens when the vassal stops paying the tax? What happens when the treaty is shattered? The vow is violated. And the blood path is mocked? According to the law of the cut covenant, the violator is cut to pieces. The contract is over. The obligation is entirely void. You are legally, morally, and socially free to walk away. You leave the betrayer to face the sword or the famine alone. That is the logical, expected reality of the ancient Middle East. But then you turn the pages of the Hebrew Scriptures. You look at Hosea buying his adulterous wife out of a slave market. You look at God pursuing a nation that has chased every false idol from Egypt to Babylon. You look at a legal contract shattered into 1,000 pieces, where every single condition for abandonment has been legally and righteously met. And yet, you see a relentless, irrational refusal to leave. To describe this impossible behavior, the biblical writers cannot use the word for legal duty, because the legal duty is broken. They cannot use the word for mere emotion, because emotion fades when betrayed. They reach for the word Miles Coverdale could not translate. People read Hosea's pursuit of a woman who broke every promise as a tragic romance, but they mistake his stubborn commitment for mere affection. Look at Hosea chapter 2, verse 19. The nation of Israel has broken the covenant. The blood oath, sworn at Sinai, has been shattered by centuries of idolatry, political corruption, and spiritual adultery. The terms have been violated. God is legally and historically entitled to walk away. And yet, speaking through the prophet to a ruined nation, God says, "I will betroth you to me forever. I will betroth you in righteousness and justice, in love and compassion." But the word translated as love in your English Bible is not a word of mere affection. It is the Hebrew noun Hesed. If something about digging into this ancient language is stirring up questions you have never considered, you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So Hosea must mirror this Hesed in his own shattered home. The word appears nearly 250 times in the Hebrew Scriptures. Its meaning is so dense, so multifaceted, that modern translators splinter it into dozens of different English words: mercy, steadfast love, goodness, loyalty, and Coverdale's famous lovingkindness. But none of those capture the true anatomy of the word. Hesed is fundamentally a covenant word. Why does he stay when every legal and logical reason to stay has evaporated? This question changes how we read every major Bible relationship. It only exists within the architecture of a relationship where a promise has been made. But it specifically describes what happens when the conditions of that promise have been utterly destroyed by the other party. When two men stand in a rocky field in 1 Samuel chapter 20, David and Jonathan swear a covenant of survival. Jonathan knows his father, King Saul, is hunting David down with a heavy iron spear. Jonathan also knows David will eventually take the throne. So Jonathan looks at his friend and begs him to show him Hesed to spare his family when the regime changes and the swords are finally drawn. He is not asking David for a warm, sentimental feeling. He is asking for a concrete action of loyal protection that extends far beyond what political logic dictates. Love asks, "Do I still feel it?" Hesed asks, "Did I promise it?" That linguistic root changes everything about the dirt floor of the slave market. When Hosea hands over 15 pieces of silver for a woman who has publicly humiliated him, he is not driven by a romantic spark. He is enacting the scandalous, illogical weight of Hesed. Hesed is not a feeling that happens to survive a betrayal. It is a loyalty that chooses to override the betrayal itself. We are terrified of abandonment. building relationships like contracts, and weighing investment against return, walking away the moment the contract is finally breached. But to see what this kind of loyalty actually costs the person who holds it, we have to leave the prophetic books entirely. We have to look at two widows standing on a dusty road, arguing about whether to turn back. Three women stand weeping on the road out of Moab. The wind blows dry salt from the Dead Sea across their faces. The sun beats down on the desolate, rocky path leading back to Judah. Naomi is hollowed out. Her husband is buried in foreign dirt. Her 2 sons are dead. Her womb is empty. Her future is a black void. In the ancient Near East, a widow without sons is a ghost. She is economically erased. She holds 0 leverage. She is completely reliant on the invisible mercy of society. Naomi looks at her 2 Moabite daughters-in-law and speaks the bitter, legal truth. Go back. She tells them to return to the houses of their mothers. I have nothing to give you. The contract is over. The men who bound us together are in the ground. She actually prays for God to show them Hesed, knowing she has no resources to provide it herself. Orpah weeps. She kisses her mother-in-law. She turns her back and walks away. Do not judge Orpah. She is not cruel. She is sensible. Hosea does not walk away. He executes a covenant. Miles Coverdale invented a new word in 1535 because reality was too heavy for English. She is following the exact legal and logical boundaries of the covenant. The marriage was dissolved by death. The reason to stay has vanished. The math of her departure is perfectly sound. But Ruth stays. The Hebrew text says she clings to Naomi. The word is dabak, the same word used in Genesis when a man leaves his father and mother and holds fast to his wife. It is a physical, desperate, unbreakable grip. She speaks words that echo down the centuries. Where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. This is not the obedience of a subordinate. It is the fierce, unyielding grip of Hesed. Ruth has no legal obligation to a bitter, impoverished foreign widow. She has no biological tie to Naomi. She owes her absolutely nothing. If she stays, she embraces poverty. If she stays, she embraces the status of a despised immigrant in a land that historically hates Moabites. If she stays, she signs up for the humiliation of gleaning leftover stalks in a barley field just to keep them both from starving. Ruth looks at the absolute evaporation of every logical reason to stay. She sees the cost of loyalty spread out before her like a desert, and she steps forward anyway. She binds herself to a woman. In the year 1535, a man named Miles Coverdale sat at a wooden desk, dipping a quill into a well of dark ink, who has nothing left to offer, invoking a death curse on herself if she ever breaks the bond. Hesed is the moment you hold the absolute, legal right to leave, and you throw the right away. It is a stunning, cinematic picture of ancient loyalty, but a story from 3,000 years ago only carries weight if it holds a mirror up to the present. Because what Ruth does on that dusty road exposes a quiet, devastating truth about how fragile our modern commitments have actually become. You know the exact moment the math shifts. You sit across a small table in a quiet coffee shop, listening to the hiss of the espresso machine, watching the person across from you stare at their hands. Or maybe you are sitting in the cold, stiff plastic chair of a hospital room, listening to the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, realizing the person in the bed will never be the same. Or perhaps you are staring at a phone screen in a dark car, reading a confession that shatters the foundation of your marriage. Suddenly, the contract is breached. The return on your emotional investment has dropped to 0. In our modern moment, this is the exact point where you are encouraged to walk away. We live in a consumer culture, and we have unconsciously built our relationships on the exact same architecture.